Hello, my sexy compatriots. This is the cup of coffee you all know and love, Minty Coffee, and I am back with another casual commentary. The topic of today's video, as the title suggests, Pyro's Flamethrowers. Specifically, my own little tier list of least to most preferred and my reasons why. Now, to clear up one thing, I love all of Pyro's Flamethrowers. Yeah, even the Phlog, as much as I hate how silly it is, but even then, every flamethrower has its own individual use that gives Pyro a massive level of variety. Either way you want to play, let's jump into each weapon and rank them from best to worst in my humble opinion. But always remember, my sexy compatriots, keep an open mind and a civil attitude. Now roll the segue!
There's so much I want to do, and tonight I want to...
The stock flamethrower is an always reliable tool for general DPS and keeping enemies at bay, being a monster in close quarters combat and having the most reliable air blast potential of the flamethrowers, being the only weapon to have no air blast penalties. While it has nowhere near the monstrous DPS of the heavy's miniguns, the Pyro has speed and mobility on his side, meaning a flamethrower in good hands can be a deadly force to be reckoned with. Now, the flamethrower damage is quite tricky to calculate, as it is dependent on particle lifetime, not distance travelled, with the most a single particle can do without crits or mini-crits being 6.82 points of damage, with a 0.08 damage variance due to differing particle angles. On top of this, since particles are dependent on their lifetime, having a high ping results in particles doing less damage than they should, so flamethrower damage is at best inconsistent, and unreliably it's weak at worst. Afterburn is pretty standard on this weapon at 60 damage over 10 seconds, like all the flamethrowers minus the Degreaser. If you have frame perfect gameplay with no ping issues whatsoever, you're looking at a massive 163.5 DPS on the stock flamethrower, if you're that lucky anyway. While it's not as flashy or as powerful in specific areas as the other flamethrowers, the stock holds a special place in my pyromanic heart as the most dependable tool in Pyro's arsenal, so I'll be putting this weapon right here at number 1. The Backburner is a sneaky little bugger capable of inflicting critical damage from behind, with the only offside being a massive plus 150% increase in air blast cost, making air blast cost a whopping 50 ammo. This weapon clearly promotes an ambushing playstyle, rewarding a sneaky and stealthy Pyro who plays with the mindset of a spy scout combo. I say this because it pairs well with weapons like the Detonator and Power Jack for increased mobility, and being able to get behind enemy teams by taking sneaky flank routes usually inaccessible to Pyros. This is best seen on maps like Frontier. Now, while the crits are nice, it should be remembered that what classifies as attacks from behind with this weapon can sometimes be very inconsistent, especially if you have the aforementioned ping issues. Even having just 30 MS more than your enemy can affect the reliability of your crits, so if the TF team can fix this ping dependent issue on the flamethrowers, I can see this weapon becoming even more monstrous with a reliable hitbox from behind. What turns me away from the weapon is the sheer nastiness of the afterburn debuff. As someone who thrives in projectile lively environments with air blasts galore, the Backburner makes fighting soldiers and demos much harder if you fail to conserve your ammo, though if you're playing like a sneaky Pyro, I guess this problem shouldn't occur too much, so I suppose this downside only comes into play if you're forced into a direct encounter. Though the weapon has its misgivings, it remains a favourite and always an interesting twist on playing Pyro, so I'll be putting it right here at number 3. The Degreaser. Here's where it gets a bit controversial because Pyromains love to use the Degreaser. Now, don't get me wrong, the Degreaser is far from a bad weapon. I myself think it is great, using it myself quite a lot. But in terms of reliability, I put it under the stock for a few reasons, mainly subjective, but let's get into it. The weapon boasts a 60% faster deployment time and 30% faster holster time, at just 0.35 seconds compared to the stock's 0.67 seconds. As a downside, air blast costs 25% more, meaning 25 ammo, while afterburn damage is cut by 66% down to 2 ticks a second. While this isn't that impactful on paper, the Degreaser's fall in DPS alongside the stock becomes much more apparent in actual play, having at best 139 DPS. Of course, that shouldn't come into play too much since it's meant to be used as a combo weapon to maximise the damage potential of secondaries like the flare gun and reserve shooter, and melees like the extinguisher. Puff and Stinging is certainly a viable way to play Pyro, and a very strong one at that, though it's a very individual kind of fighting style, by which I mean the more people you're up against in a fight, the less effective Puff and Sting's going to become, whereas the stock shotgun and stock flamethrower allow for more consistent DPS. Ergo, the Degreaser is great for a lone Pyro who likes to fight one-on-one. When it becomes 1 versus 2 or 1 versus 3 though, especially if you're that unlucky to even be in that situation, it becomes more noticeable that the Degreaser kind of falls. For this reason primarily, being that I much prefer the reliability of the stock Flamethrower's DPS and air blast potential, I'll be putting the Degreaser right here at about number 2.
I want you to sing!
The Phlogistinator. This monstrous little devil needs to be talked about, even if it's universally hated by the TF2 community. This weapon allows you to attack with critical hits after building up 300 burn damage at the cost of 10% less base damage and no air blast. That's kind of enough for me to already hate this thing, really, but jokes aside, this weapon certainly emphasises itself as an uber upgrade to the stock in terms of close quarters potential, being the only flamethrower that rewards getting a lot of burn damage, and it's the only one that can hold a candle to the DPS of the minigun once its crits come into play, and works wonders in that regard as a close quarters dominator. However, the Phlog probably has the worst hit reg of all the damn flamethrowers. I mean, using this thing feels like RNG, the game to me. On top of that, the lack of any air blast makes fighting soldiers and demo men a nightmare. I don't know really what else I can say for it. It's great if you're a CQC heavy Pyro, but the lack of air blast is a nightmare for supportive Pyros. So I'll be putting it right here at number 4. So yeah, the stock flamethrower is my favourite flamethrower to use, and the Degreaser I put underneath it because I don't think it's as reliable. You might disagree with me, and that is fine. If you think the Degreaser is more reliable to use, I'm not going to say don't use it. If you like using the Degreaser, go ahead, it's a really good weapon. But anyway, what do you think of my list? Think the Degreaser still reigns supreme? Think the Backburner somehow beats the lot? Think the Phlog is the undisputed champ? Let me know in the comments below. This has been your favourite cup of coffee, and I shall see you next time, my sexy compatriots. Bye!
I am the man who arranges the blocks that continue to fall from up above. The food on your plate now belongs to the state, a collective regime of peace and love.